Commander Zextel stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Bone Render, watching the small blue planet rotate slowly on the main screen. His 4 arms crossed over his armored chest as his reptilian eyes studied the tactical displays. Earth looked so peaceful from orbit. With its white clouds and vast oceans, it seemed almost criminal to destroy something so beautiful, but the hegemony had given clear orders. The planet had refused to surrender when the Vorthan fleet arrived. Worse, they had actually fired on his ships when he demanded their submission. Such insolence could not go unpunished. The humans would serve as an example to the rest of this spiral arm of the galaxy. Sir, Lieutenant Carvin approached, his scales clicking against the metal floor. The invasion forces ready? 70,000 Vorthan shock troops, 500 heavy walkers, and 3 assault carriers. The humans have approximately 30,000 defenders on the surface of their colony world, Kepler Prime. Zixthel nodded slowly. The numbers were more than sufficient. His forces had conquered worlds with 10x the population. These humans, with their soft skin and fragile bones, would break easily. According to intelligence reports, they had only recently developed spaceflight, and their weapons were primitive projectile launchers. Some of them still used chemical explosives. What do we know about their military capabilities? Zextel asked, though he expected little threat from such a young species. Very limited, sir. They appear to use kinetic weapons, metal projectiles propelled by chemical reactions. No energy weapons detected. Their armor is made of simple metals and ceramics. No bioenhancement technology, no genetic modifications. They are essentially baseline organic beings with no significant physical advantages. Zexthel allowed himself a small smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Baseline organics. How charmingly primitive. Very well. Begin the assault. I want this concluded before the next sleep cycle. The first wave of Vorthan dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling meteors. Zexthel watched through the tactical displays as his troops landed in the designated zones around the human settlement of New Harmony. The plan was simple. Surround the city, overwhelm their defenses, and capture the survivors for interrogation and processing. But something went wrong almost immediately. The first reports came in as garbled static and screaming. Zexthel frowned and adjusted the communication channels. Squad Leader Vexstar, report your status. Static. Then a voice, strained and confused. Commander, we are taking casualties. Heavy casualties. The humans. They are not fighting as expected. Explain, Zexthel demanded, his voice a low growl. They do not stand and fight, sir. They disappear. Our sensors show them one moment, then nothing. They attack from nowhere, kill several warriors, then vanish again. And, sir, their weapons. They are more effective than intelligence suggested. Zexthel's eyes narrowed. Impossible. They use primitive projectile weapons. Your scales should deflect anything they can throw at you. That is what we thought, sir. But they aim for joints and weak points. They seem to know exactly where our armor is vulnerable, and their weapons... Some of them fire projectiles that explode after penetration. Others fire multiple projectiles at once. We have lost 12 warriors in the first hour. Zexthel had expected to lose perhaps 5 or 6 in the entire operation. Something was definitely not going according to plan. Send in the heavy walkers, he ordered. If they want to hide, we will flush them out. The heavy walkers were massive machines, each one standing 30 feet tall and armed with plasma cannons that could level city blocks. 20 of them deployed from the second wave of dropships, their metal feet shaking the ground as they marched toward the human positions. Zexthel watched the feed from Walker Unit 7 as it approached what appeared to be an empty street. The humans had evacuated the outer districts, leaving behind empty buildings and abandoned vehicles. It should have been a simple advance to the city center. Then the walkers simply stopped moving. Unit 7, report, Zexthel commanded. Sir, we have a problem. The walker's legs are not responding. Something has damaged the hydraulic systems. On the screen, Zexthel could see smoke rising from beneath the massive machine. Then he saw movement, tiny figures darting between buildings, too fast for the walker's weapons to track. There, he pointed. Humans. But how did they damage a heavy walker? His question was answered a moment later, when another walker suddenly listed to one side, its left leg collapsing. Then another, and another. They are using explosives, sir, came the panicked report. Planted under the surface. The humans dug tunnels beneath the street and mined the entire approach route. Zexthel stared at the display in disbelief. In less than 2 hours, the humans had disabled 6 heavy walkers using nothing but primitive explosives and tactical cunning. This was not how invasions were supposed to proceed. Pull back the walkers, he ordered. Send in the hover tanks, they cannot mine the air. But the hover tanks fared little better. The humans had somehow acquired portable missiles, crude compared to Vorthan technology, but effective enough to bring down a hover tank if they hit the right spot. And the humans seemed to always hit the right spot. More disturbing was their behavior. Zexthul had fought many species across the galaxy, and they all followed predictable patterns. They either met his forces head-on in a doomed display of bravery, or they surrendered when faced with superior technology. The humans did neither. They fought like ghosts. They appeared, struck with precision, and vanished before his troops could respond. They used the terrain to their advantage in ways that seemed almost supernatural. They turned their own city into a weapon, using buildings for cover, sewers for movement, and even the rubble from destroyed structures as improvised barriers. Worst of all, they adapted. Every tactic his forces used, the humans found a counter for within hours. When the Vorthans advanced in formation, the humans used explosives to break them apart. When they spread out to avoid concentrated attacks, the humans picked them off one by one with sniper fire. When they used air support, the humans seemed to vanish entirely, only to reappear behind their lines. By the end of the first day, Zexthal had lost over 3,000 warriors, 3,000 experienced soldiers, killed by a force of primitive humans using weapons that should have been ineffective against Vorthan armor. Sir, Lieutenant Carvin approached again, his scales now showing the stress patterns that indicated fear. Perhaps we should request additional forces from the fleet. These humans are proving more resilient than anticipated. Zexthul wanted to refuse. To admit that 30,000 humans with primitive weapons were holding off 70,000 Vorthan shock troops was humiliating beyond words. But the tactical displays did not lie. His forces were taking unsustainable losses. Very well. Deploy the second wave, another 50,000 troops, and bring the orbital bombardment platforms online. If these humans want to play guerrilla warfare, we will simply level their entire city. But even as he gave the orders, Zexthal felt something he had never experienced before in 3 centuries of warfare. It was a cold sensation in his stomach, a tightness in his chest that made it difficult to breathe properly. He dismissed it as indigestion from the stress of an unexpectedly difficult campaign. He had no word for what he was actually feeling, because Commander Zexthal had never experienced fear before. The second wave of dropships descended through the atmosphere, carrying fresh troops and heavier weapons. Zexthal was confident that overwhelming force would end this embarrassing delay. The humans had shown tactical skill, yes, but they were still just soft organics with primitive technology. Numbers and firepower would prevail. He could not have been more wrong. The humans had used the time during the first assault to prepare. When the second wave landed, they found the landing zones booby-trapped with explosives. The dropships that survived the initial blasts found themselves under immediate attack from multiple directions. The humans had somehow coordinated a simultaneous assault across 12 separate landing sites. But it was not just the coordination that unsettled Zexthal. It was the nature of the attacks themselves. The humans fought with a vicious creativity that defied everything he knew about warfare. They used their own industrial equipment as weapons, turning construction machinery into improvised tanks. They employed chemical attacks using their own industrial compounds, creating clouds of toxic gas that ate through Vorthan armor. Most disturbing of all was their willingness to sacrifice themselves. Zexthal watched in horror as a single human charged directly at a squad of Vorthan warriors, detonating explosives strapped to his own body. The blast killed the human instantly, but it also eliminated 7 veteran soldiers. "Commander," came a shaky voice over the communications channel. "Squad leader Nextar reporting. We have encountered something unusual." "Define unusual," Zexthal demanded, though he was beginning to dread the answer. "The humans, sir, they are not just fighting us. They are studying us. We found one of their positions where they had been observing our troops through magnification devices. They have detailed drawings of our armor, marking weak points and joint locations. They know exactly how to kill us most efficiently." The cold sensation in Zexthal's stomach grew stronger. An enemy that learned and adapted was dangerous enough. But an enemy that studied their opponents with scientific precision while fighting for their lives, that was something else entirely. "And, sir," the squad leader continued, "we found something else." "Messages, written in their language, but we have translators. They were instructions, tactical manuals, teaching their soldiers how to fight us specifically." "Impossible," Zexthal growled. They had never encountered Vorthans before our arrival. How could they have tactical manuals? "That is what is so disturbing, sir. They wrote them after we landed. In less than 12 hours, they analyzed our forces, identified our weaknesses, and distributed countermeasures to their entire army. Sir, these humans learn faster than any species we have ever encountered. As if to prove the point, the tactical displays suddenly lit up with new alerts. The humans had launched a coordinated counterattack against 3 separate Vorthan positions simultaneously, but these were not the desperate charges of a dying army. These were precise surgical strikes designed to inflict maximum casualties while minimizing their own losses. Zexthal watched in growing unease as his forces were pushed back from positions they had held for hours. The humans moved with a fluid precision that spoke of careful planning and extensive practice, but they had only had days to prepare. How had they achieved such coordination so quickly? The answer came from an unexpected source. One of his communications officers intercepted a human transmission and ran it through the translation matrix. This is Alpha Team. Package delivered. Charlie Team. You are clear for Phase 2. Bravo Team. Maintain overwatch and report any movement on the north approach. Professional, efficient, emotionless military communication. But that was impossible. According to intelligence reports, these humans had been colonists and miners, not soldiers. They should not have possessed military training or experience. Commander, his intelligence officer approached with a data pad. I have been analyzing the human prisoners we captured. Their backgrounds are unexpected. Explain. These are not just civilian colonists, sir. Among their population, we have identified former military personnel from their homeworld. Engineers, medics, strategists, special forces operators. They appear to have deliberately included military expertise in their colonization effort. Zextal's claws extended involuntarily. How many? Nearly 15% of their population has military experience, sir. But that is not the most concerning aspect. The concerning aspect is how they are using that expertise. They have essentially turned their entire civilian population into an army in less than a week. The cold sensation in Zextal's stomach was now spreading to his limbs. He had seen many species fight desperately when cornered, but this was something different. This was not desperation. This was systematic, calculated warfare conducted by an entire population that had transformed itself into a military force overnight. Sir, another officer called from the tactical station. We are receiving a transmission from the humans. They are requesting a ceasefire to discuss terms. Zexthal almost laughed. After 3 days of fighting, with his forces having suffered over 8,000 casualties, the humans wanted to discuss terms. No doubt they were finally ready to surrender. Put them through, he commanded. The main screen flickered and resolved into the image of a human. Zexthal studied the creature with professional interest. It was smaller than he had expected, with pale skin and short brown fur on its head. Its eyes were a startling blue color, and they looked directly into the camera, with no sign of fear or submission. I am Colonel Sarah Chen, commanding officer of the New Harmony Defense Force, the human said, in accented but clear galactic standard. I am authorized to negotiate on behalf of the human colonists. I am Commander Zextal of the Vorthan Hegemony, he replied. You wish to discuss the terms of your surrender. The human's expression did not change. No, Commander, I wish to discuss the terms of your withdrawal. For a moment, Zextal was too stunned to respond. A force of 30,000 humans facing 70,000 Vorthan shock troops, supported by orbital platforms and heavy armor, was demanding that he withdraw. You cannot be serious, he finally managed. Commander, Colonel Chen said calmly, in the past 3 days, your forces have suffered over 8,000 casualties, while achieving none of your operational objectives. Our casualties number fewer than 600. At the current rate of attrition, your invasion force will be combat ineffective within 2 weeks. The numbers were accurate, though hearing them stated so matter-of-factly by the enemy was deeply unsettling. Zexthal found himself at a loss for words. Furthermore, the human continued, we have been monitoring your communications. We know you have not yet reported the true scope of your losses to your superiors. We also know that requesting additional reinforcements would raise questions about your competence as a commander. How did they know that? Zexthal's communications were encrypted with military-grade systems. A human should not have been able to intercept them, much less decode them. You have exactly 1 hour to begin withdrawing your forces, Colonel Chen stated. After that time, we will resume combat operations. However, I should warn you that our next phase will be considerably more aggressive than our defensive actions thus far. More aggressive? Zextal looked at his casualty reports again. If this was the humans fighting defensively, what would they do when they went on the offensive? You are bluffing, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Colonel Chen smiled, and for the first time in the conversation, Zextal saw something in her expression that made his scales ripple with involuntary fear. It was not hatred or anger. It was the cold, calculating look of a predator that had decided it was time to hunt. "Commander," she said softly, "we are humans. We do not bluff about war." Commander Zextol cut the transmission and stared at the blank screen for several long moments. The silence on the command deck was deafening. His officers avoided his gaze, busying themselves with their instruments and displays. "Sir," Lieutenant Carven finally ventured, "your orders?" Zextel's 4 hands clenched into fists. 1 hour. The humans had given him 1 hour to withdraw, as if he were some minor pirate captain rather than a decorated commander of the hegemony fleet. The insult was intolerable. "Signal all ground forces," he commanded. "Prepare for full assault. Deploy the remaining walkers and all armor units. I want every human position obliterated within 6 hours." But even as he gave the order, the cold sensation in his stomach intensified. Colonel Chen's final words echoed in his mind. "We are humans. We do not bluff about war." The hour passed with agonizing slowness. Zextel used the time to study the tactical displays, trying to identify human positions and plan his overwhelming assault. But the scanner readings made no sense. According to his instruments, there were human life signs scattered throughout the city, but they were moving in patterns that defied military logic. Small groups were advancing toward his positions rather than retreating to defensive positions. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving multiple signals from our ground units. They are reporting unusual activity." "Define unusual," Zextel said, though he was beginning to hate that word. "Human forces are advancing on all fronts, sir. But they are not advancing to attack our positions. They appear to be surrounding them." "Surrounding them?" Zextel studied the tactical display more carefully. His forces held 17 major positions throughout the city, each one fortified and well defended. The humans would need overwhelming numbers to threaten even one of those positions, much less all of them simultaneously. "Impossible," he muttered. "They do not have sufficient forces to surround our positions. Their entire army is smaller than our forces at any 3 positions." "That is what we thought, sir," the officer replied nervously, "but the scanner readings are consistent. We are detecting human movement patterns consistent with encirclement tactics." Before Zextal could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the command deck. Multiple alerts flashed on the main screen, emergency signals from ground units across the battlefield. "Report!" Zextal roared. "Sir, we are receiving distress calls from Forward Base Alpha. They report they are under attack by an unknown number of human forces. The attack appears to be coming from multiple directions simultaneously." "Forward Base Alpha?" Zextal checked the tactical map. "That is our strongest position. 2,000 warriors, heavy fortifications, air support. How many humans are attacking?" "Unknown, sir. The base commander reports that his sensors are malfunctioning. He cannot get accurate counts of attacking forces." More alerts flashed on the screen. Forward Base Beta was under attack. Then Gamma. Then Delta. Within minutes, every major Vorthan position was reporting simultaneous assaults by human forces. "This is impossible," Zextal growled. "They cannot attack 17 positions simultaneously. They do not have the numbers." "Sir," his intelligence officer approached with another datapad, "I may have an explanation. We have been monitoring human communications more carefully. They appear to be using a coordination system unlike anything we have encountered before." "Explain." "They are operating as a single distributed intelligence, sir. Every human unit is in constant communication with every other unit. When one group engages our forces, every other group receives real-time tactical data about our response patterns, weapon capabilities, and defensive measures." Zextal stared at the officer. "You mean they are sharing tactical intelligence instantaneously across their entire force?" "More than that, sir. They are learning from each engagement and immediately applying those lessons to every other engagement happening simultaneously. Each human squad benefits from the combat experience of every other squad in real time." The implications hit Zextal like a physical blow. His forces were not fighting 30,000 individual humans. They were fighting a single coordinated organism with 30,000 eyes, 30,000 hands, and a collective intelligence that grew stronger with every moment of combat. "Sir!" The communications officer's voice was strained with panic. "Forward Base Alpha is reporting catastrophic casualties. The humans have breached their perimeter using weapons and tactics that do not match any previous intelligence." "What kind of weapons?" "They appear to be using our own weapons against us, sir. Captured Vorthan plasma rifles and explosives. But they have modified them somehow. The plasma rifles are firing in patterns our armor was not designed to deflect." "Modified Vorthan weapons? That was impossible." It took Vorthan engineers years of training to understand plasma rifle technology. The humans could not have reverse-engineered and modified captured weapons in just a few hours. But the evidence was undeniable. On the tactical displays, Zexthul watched as his positions fell one by one, not to overwhelming force or desperate charges, but to precision strikes by small coordinated teams that seemed to know exactly where every weakness lay. "Sir," another officer called, "Forward Base Beta is requesting immediate evacuation. They report that the humans have cut off all escape routes and are systematically eliminating defensive positions." "How is that possible?" "Beta is surrounded by open ground. There's nowhere for the humans to hide." "According to the base commander, sir, they are not hiding. They are simply moving too fast for our defensive systems to track effectively." "Moving too fast?" Zexthul called up the feed from Base Beta's security cameras. What he saw made his blood run cold. Humans were moving across open ground toward the Vorthan positions, but they were not running in straight lines like conventional infantry. They moved in short, unpredictable bursts, using smoke and debris for concealment. More disturbingly, they seemed to anticipate exactly where his soldiers would aim their weapons, dodging and weaving through defensive fire with almost supernatural precision. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. "We believe they are using predictive algorithms, sir," his intelligence officer replied. "They have been observing our soldiers' response patterns and have developed mathematical models to predict where we will aim our weapons." Mathematical models. The humans were using mathematics to predict the future behavior of individual soldiers in combat. The concept was so alien that Zexthul struggled to comprehend it, but the results were undeniable. On screen after screen, he watched human forces dismantle his carefully constructed defenses with surgical precision. They moved like dancers, each step perfectly choreographed to avoid his weapons while closing distance on his positions. "Sir," the communications officer announced, "we are receiving a transmission from Forward Base Gamma. The human forces attacking their position have—" "Sir, you need to see this." The main screen flickered to show the feed from Base Gamma. Zexthul expected to see another coordinated assault by human infantry. Instead, he saw something that made no sense at all. The humans were not attacking the base. They were building something. "What are they constructing?" he demanded. "Unknown, sir. It appears to be some kind of launching mechanism. They are using debris from destroyed buildings and components from their own civilian equipment." As Zexthul watched, the humans completed their improvised construction and loaded it with what appeared to be a large metal cylinder. Then they aimed it directly at the base's main power generator and fired. The cylinder sailed through the air in a perfect arc and struck the generator with devastating accuracy. The explosion that followed knocked out power to the entire base, leaving the Vorthan defenders blind and helpless. "They built a siege engine," Zexthul whispered in disbelief. "In the middle of a firefight, they'd built a siege engine from scrap metal and used it to disable our power systems. But that was just the beginning. Over the next hour, Zexthul watched as the humans demonstrated a creativity in warfare that defied everything he thought he knew about combat. They turned civilian vehicles into mobile weapons platforms. They used their knowledge of chemistry to create explosives from common materials. They even weaponized their own construction equipment, using industrial tools to tear through Vorthan fortifications. Most disturbing of all was their apparent lack of fear. Zexthul had seen many species fight desperately when cornered, but there was always an element of panic, a fear-driven desperation. The humans showed no such emotions. They fought with the calm, methodical precision of scientists conducting an experiment. "Sir," Lieutenant Carvin approached, his scales now showing clear stress patterns. "Perhaps we should consider the human terms. A tactical withdrawal might be advisable." "Withdrawal?" Zexthul snarled. "We outnumber them more than 2-1. We have superior weapons and armor. We cannot be defeated by a force of primitive humans." But even as he spoke the words, another alert flashed on the main display. Forward Base Delta had gone silent. Not destroyed silent. The last transmission had been a confused report about humans infiltrating the base through the ventilation systems. The humans had somehow mapped the internal structure of Vorthan military bases and found ways to infiltrate them without triggering any alarms. "Sir," the intelligence officer approached again, "I have completed analysis of the human tactics. The results are disturbing." "Show me." The main screen displayed a complex tactical analysis with movement patterns, engagement statistics, and predictive models, but the conclusion was simple and terrifying. "The humans are not fighting a defensive action, sir. They never were. From the moment we landed, they have been fighting an offensive campaign designed to eliminate our entire invasion force." "That is impossible." They were outnumbered and outgunned. No sane commander would attempt an offensive action under those circumstances. That is what makes this so disturbing, sir. They did not see themselves as outnumbered. They saw us as targets that had conveniently gathered themselves in one location. Zexthal stared at the analysis in growing horror. The human tactics were not desperate or improvised. They were part of a carefully planned strategy that had anticipated every move his forces would make. The humans had allowed him to land his troops, establish positions, and begin his assault, all the while preparing to systematically destroy his entire army. They were never trying to defend their city, he realized. They were using their city as a trap. Yes, sir, and we walked directly into it. The tactical displays showed the true scope of the disaster. Of his original 70,000 shock troops, fewer than 40,000 remained combat effective. The humans had achieved a nearly 2-to-1 kill ratio using nothing but primitive weapons and tactical superiority. But the numbers were not the worst part. The worst part was the implications. If a force of 30,000 humans with primitive weapons could defeat 70,000 veteran Vorthan warriors, what would happen when humanity developed proper military technology? What would happen when they built their own fleet and brought their tactical innovations to space combat? For the first time in his military career, Commander Zexthal was forced to confront the possibility that the Vorthan hegemony might have encountered an enemy they could not defeat. "Sir," the communications officer called, "we are receiving another transmission from Colonel Chen." Zexthal did not want to answer. He was not ready to face the human commander again, not when his forces had suffered such devastating losses. But his pride would not allow him to ignore the call. "Put her through." Colonel Chen's image appeared on the main screen. She looked exactly the same as before, calm, professional, completely unruffled by the fact that her forces had just demolished one of the galaxy's premier military units. "Commander Zexthal," she said politely, "I trust you have had time to reconsider our offer." "You have won this engagement," Zexthal admitted through gritted teeth. "But you cannot win a war. The hegemony has thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. We will return with overwhelming force." Colonel Chen nodded as if she had expected this response.
"I understand your position, Commander."
"However, I think there are some things you should consider before you make that decision." "Such as?" "We have been monitoring your fleet communications for the past several hours. We know that you have not reported the true scope of your losses to your superiors. We also know that several other hegemony commanders are watching your mission very carefully." Zexthal's blood chilled. If other commanders learned that he had been defeated by primitive humans, his career would be over. Worse, he would face execution for incompetence. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Nothing complicated, Commander. We want you to report to your superiors that the humans of Kepler Prime have agreed to join the hegemony as voluntary members rather than conquered subjects. In exchange, we will allow your forces to withdraw with minimal additional casualties. And if I refuse?" Colonel Chen's expression did not change, but something cold flickered in her blue eyes. "Then in approximately 6 hours, Commander, your invasion force will cease to exist, and we will be forced to capture some of your ships to ensure that word of our capabilities does not reach your superiors prematurely." Capture his ships? Zexthal almost laughed. The humans had no space capability beyond primitive shuttles. How could they possibly threaten his orbital fleet? As if reading his thoughts, Colonel Chen continued, "I should mention that several of our mining shuttles have been making routine supply runs to the orbital shipyards over the past few days. Standard commercial traffic, nothing unusual. However, those shuttles were carrying rather more than mining equipment. The implications hit Zexthal like a physical blow. Human saboteurs were already aboard his ships. While his attention had been focused on the ground battle, the humans had been infiltrating his fleet. "You see, Commander," Colonel Chen said with that same cold smile, "humans are very good at thinking several moves ahead. We have been planning for this conversation since before your first dropship landed." Zexthal found himself staring at a human who had outmaneuvered him at every turn, anticipated his every move, and systematically destroyed his invasion force while simultaneously infiltrating his fleet. And she had done it all while maintaining the calm demeanor of someone discussing routine business arrangements. For the first time in his life, Commander Zexthal truly understood what it meant to be outclassed by an enemy. Not just defeated, but completely, thoroughly outmatched by a superior tactical mind. "I will consider your terms," he said finally. "I am sure you will, Commander. You have 4 hours to make your decision. After that time, I cannot guarantee the safety of your remaining forces." The transmission ended, leaving Zexthal alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that he had encountered something far more dangerous than anyone in the hegemony had imagined. The humans were not just another primitive species to be conquered and absorbed. They were predators. And for the first time in his life, Zexthal was the prey. Commander Zexthal paced the command deck of his flagship, his claws clicking against the metal floor with each step. 4 hours. Colonel Chen had given him 4 hours to decide between humiliation and annihilation. Neither option was acceptable, but the tactical displays told a story he could no longer ignore. His ground forces were scattered and demoralized. In the past 6 hours alone, he had lost another 8,000 warriors to human attacks that came from everywhere and nowhere. The humans moved through the city like ghosts, striking precisely where his defenses were weakest, then vanishing before his forces could respond. "Sir," Lieutenant Carvin approached hesitantly, "the casualty reports from the surface are significant." Zexthal did not need to see the reports. He could read the story in the stress scales and nervous movements of his crew. His reputation, built over 3 centuries of successful campaigns, was crumbling with every passing hour. "Sir," another officer called from the communication station, "we have intercepted additional human transmissions. Their coordination appears to be even more sophisticated than we initially believed." "Show me." The main screen displayed a network analysis of human communications. What Zexthal saw made his stomach clench with that cold sensation that was becoming all too familiar. The humans were not just sharing tactical information, they were sharing everything. Medical data, engineering solutions, psychological profiles of Vorthan soldiers, predictive models of Vorthan behavior patterns. They have created a real-time database of everything they have learned about us, he realized. Every human unit has access to every piece of information their species has gathered. "More than that, sir," the intelligence officer added. "They appear to be conducting simultaneous experiments across multiple engagement zones. Each attack is designed to test a different hypothesis about our capabilities and weaknesses." Experiments. The humans were treating his invasion force like laboratory specimens, conducting systematic tests to determine the most effective ways to kill Vorthans. It was a level of clinical detachment that made his scales crawl. "Sir," the tactical officer announced, "we are detecting unusual activity in the shipyards. The human infiltrators are moving." Zexthal rushed to the tactical station and stared at the readings. Throughout his fleet, small groups of heat signatures were moving through the ship's corridors. They were heading toward critical systems, engines, weapons, life support. "How many infiltrators are aboard our ships?" "Unknown, sir. They appear to be using some kind of stealth technology to mask their presence. We can only detect them when they move through certain corridors." Stealth technology. But the humans were primitive. They should not have possessed any technology capable of evading Vorthan sensors. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we are receiving multiple emergency signals from the fleet. Engine rooms across 7 ships are reporting fires of unknown origin. Sabotage." The humans were systematically crippling his fleet while his attention was focused on the ground battle. But how had they gotten aboard his ships in the first place? "Sir," the intelligence officer approached with yet another data pad, "I have been analyzing the human infiltration strategy. The method they used is ingenious." "Explain." "They used our own logistics against us, sir. When we arrived in the system, we followed standard protocol and established supply lines with local facilities. The humans made certain that their people were included in the work crews that serviced our ships." Zexthal stared at the officer in disbelief. "You mean they volunteered to work on our ships?" "Yes, sir. They presented themselves as compliant local workers and gained access to our vessels through normal commercial channels. Our security scans detected no weapons or obvious threats, so they were cleared for routine maintenance work." "But they must have smuggled weapons or explosives aboard somehow." "No, sir. That is what makes this so disturbing. They used materials that were already present on our ships. Cleaning chemicals, maintenance tools, even food supplies. They turned our own resources into weapons. The implications were staggering. The humans had infiltrated his fleet using nothing more than their own ingenuity and his force's standard operating procedures. They had turned routine logistics into an act of war." "How much damage can they cause?" "Potentially catastrophic, sir. If they have sabotaged the right systems, they could disable or destroy entire ships." As if to emphasize the point, alarms began blaring throughout the fleet. The dreadnought Void Cleaver was reporting complete engine failure. The battlecruiser Death's Edge had lost primary weapons. The assault carrier Bone Crusher was evacuating all personnel due to life support system failures. In less than an hour, the human infiltrators had crippled nearly half of his fleet using nothing but materials they had found aboard the ships themselves. "Sir," the communications officer called, "we are receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Kexvan. He is requesting a status report on Operation Clean Sweep." "Admiral Keksvan, Zexthol's direct superior and one of the most ruthless commanders in the hegemony. If he learned that the operation had been a complete disaster, Zexthol would face a fate worse than death. Tell the Admiral that we are consolidating our position and will have a full report within 12 hours. Sir, Lieutenant Carvin said quietly, perhaps it is time to consider the human proposal. Our situation is untenable. Zexthol wanted to roar in frustration, but he forced himself to remain calm. His pride demanded that he find some way to salvage the situation, but the tactical realities were undeniable. He was facing an enemy unlike anything the hegemony had ever encountered. Sir? The intelligence officer approached again. I have completed a comprehensive analysis of human combat capabilities. The conclusions are disturbing. More disturbing than what we have already seen? Yes, sir. Based on their tactical innovations and adaptation rate, I project that if humanity were given access to proper military technology, they could pose a significant threat to the hegemony itself. That is impossible. They are one species on a handful of worlds. The hegemony controls thousands of systems. That is what makes the projections so concerning, sir. They do not need superior numbers or technology. They need only superior tactics and coordination, and they have demonstrated both in abundance.
Zexthol studied the officer's analysis. The mathematical models showed scenarios that defied belief.
Single human fleets defeating much larger hegemony forces through tactical superiority, human ground forces conquering entire planets using nothing but captured equipment and local resources. According to these projections, the officer continued, if humanity were to acquire military-grade technology and expand beyond their current territories, they could become the dominant species in this spiral arm within 50 years. 50 years. From primitive colony worlds to galactic superpower in 50 years. The timeline seemed impossible, but the humans had already demonstrated their ability to achieve impossible things. Sir, the tactical officer announced, the human deadline has expired. We are detecting new activity in the city. Zexthol looked at the main display and felt his blood turn to ice. The humans were not launching another attack on his remaining forces. They were doing something far worse. They were leaving. Explain what I am seeing, he demanded. The human forces appear to be withdrawing from combat zones, sir. They are pulling back to defensive positions around their civilian areas. Why would they withdraw when they have been winning? His question was answered by a new transmission. Colonel Chen appeared on the screen, but this time she was not alone. Behind her stood dozens of other humans, all wearing what appeared to be military uniforms. Commander Zexthol, she said formally, I regret to inform you that negotiations have concluded unsuccessfully. As of this moment, the human colonies are declaring independence from all external authority and implementing full military protocols. Full military protocols. Zexthol felt the cold sensation in his stomach intensify. What does that mean? It means, Commander, that you are no longer dealing with civilian colonists fighting to defend their homes. You are now dealing with the human colonial defense force, operating under military authority with full rules of engagement authorization. Behind Colonel Chen, the other humans began moving with precise coordinated motions. These were not the improvised tactics of desperate civilians. This was the disciplined movement of a professional military force. You have been fighting civilians for the past week, Colonel Chen continued. Miners, engineers, teachers, farmers, people with families and homes who simply wanted to be left alone. Civilians. Zexthol stared at the transmission in growing horror. His elite shock troops had been systematically defeated by civilians. Teachers and farmers had outmaneuvered veteran warriors using improvised weapons and tactical innovations. I think you deserve to understand what you are truly facing, Commander, Colonel Chen said. Before we begin the next phase of this engagement, the camera pulled back to show more of the human command center. Zexthol saw displays and equipment that looked far more advanced than anything his intelligence reports had indicated. But more disturbing were the humans operating the equipment. They moved with the fluid precision of experienced military personnel. You see, Commander, the human colonies were not established randomly. They were established by people with specific skill sets needed for survival in hostile environments. Engineers who could build anything from scrap materials. Chemists who could create explosives from household chemicals. Former Special Forces operators who could train civilian populations in military tactics. The implications crashed over Zexthol like a physical blow. The human colonies had not been random settlements. They had been carefully planned military outposts, disguised as civilian communities but designed to be self-sufficient military forces. But more importantly, Colonel Chen continued, They were established by people who had studied galactic history, people who knew that eventually species like yours would come to take what we had built. The humans had been preparing for this war for years, possibly decades. They had studied hegemony tactics, analyzed Vorthan weaknesses, and designed their entire colonial strategy around the inevitability of conflict. The mining equipment we used to build improvised weapons? Designed with dual-use capabilities from the beginning. The tunnel systems we used for mobility? Constructed as part of our original city planning. The coordination systems that allowed us to share tactical information? Built into our colonial communication networks from day one. Zexthal realized with growing dread that everything the humans had done, every tactic, every innovation, every moment of tactical genius had been planned in advance. His forces had not stumbled into a trap. They had been lured into a carefully prepared killing field. "And now, Commander," Colonel Chen said with that cold smile, "you have helped us complete our final test." Test? Our defensive systems were designed based on theoretical models of hegemony tactics. We needed to verify that our innovations would work against actual Vorthan forces before we implemented them on a larger scale. The cold sensation in Zexthal's stomach became a freezing knot of terror. A larger scale? Did you really think Kepler Prime was the only human colony with these capabilities, Commander? We have 47 colonial settlements, each one designed as a self-contained military force, each one equipped with the innovations you have helped us test and refine. 47 colonies. 47 military outposts disguised as civilian settlements, each one capable of defeating a hegemony invasion force using nothing but improvised weapons and tactical superiority. But that is not the most important thing you have helped us accomplish, Commander, Colonel Chen continued. The most important thing is that you have provided us with detailed intelligence on hegemony military capabilities, tactics, and weaknesses. Information that will be shared with every human settlement in this spiral arm. Zexthal stared at the screen in horror as the full scope of the human strategy became clear. This had never been about defending one colony world. This had been about gathering intelligence for a war that humanity was already planning to fight. "You have 47 colonies," he said slowly, "but the hegemony has thousands of worlds. Even if each of your settlements could defeat an invasion force, we outnumber you 1,000 to 1. Colonel Chen's smile became genuinely warm for the first time in their conversations. "Commander, you are thinking like a Vorthan. You are thinking about numbers and territory and conventional military strength. How else should I think? You should think like a human. We do not need to match your numbers. We do not need to control territory. We do not need conventional military strength." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an undertone that made Zexthal's scales ripple with instinctive fear. "We need only to do what we have done here. Convince your enemies that humanity is more valuable as an ally than as a target." "Our enemies? Come now, Commander. Did you really think the hegemony was the only galactic power with territorial ambitions? Did you think no one else was watching this engagement?" The tactical displays suddenly lit up with new contacts. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace around the planet, but they were not hegemony vessels. The sensor profiles identified them as belonging to 3 different species, all of them traditional enemies of the Vorthan hegemony. "The Zephyrians, the Crystalline Consortium, and the Void Touched," Colonel Chen announced cheerfully. "All very interested in seeing how a small human colony could defeat a hegemony invasion force." Zexthal stared at the displays in growing panic. His crippled fleet was now surrounded by enemy vessels, and he had just demonstrated to the galaxy's major powers that humanity could defeat Vorthan forces using primitive technology. "Do not worry, Commander," Colonel Chen said. "We have already opened negotiations with your enemies. They are very interested in learning more about human tactical innovations. Very interested indeed." The cold sensation in Zexthal's stomach became a crushing weight of absolute terror. The humans had not just defeated his invasion force, they had used his invasion as a demonstration for potential allies, showing the galaxy that humanity could provide military advantages to anyone willing to oppose the hegemony. "You have turned this entire sector against us," he whispered. "We have given this entire sector a choice, Commander. They can continue to fear hegemony expansion, or they can work with humanity to ensure that the hegemony learns to respect the sovereignty of other species." For the first time in his life, Commander Zexthal understood what it meant to be completely, utterly outmaneuvered by an enemy. The humans had not just won a battle. They had engineered a fundamental shift in the galactic balance of power. And they had done it using nothing but tactical brilliance and his own invasion force as a demonstration tool. "What do you want?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Nothing complicated, Commander," Colonel Chen replied. "We want you to go home and deliver a message to your superiors." Commander Zextel stood in the conference chamber aboard the hegemony flagship Dominion's Fist, facing a tribunal of the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy. Admiral Kex Van sat at the center of the curved table, his ancient scales bearing the scars of 100 battles. To his left and right sat the other Supreme Commanders, their eyes cold with barely contained fury. 3 weeks had passed since the disaster at Kepler Prime. 3 weeks of humiliation, investigation, and growing dread as the implications of his defeat became clear to the hegemony leadership. "Commander Zexthal," Admiral Kex Van's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "You will now explain to this tribunal how 70,000 elite shock troops, supported by heavy armor and orbital bombardment platforms, were defeated by 30,000 human civilians armed with primitive weapons." Zexthal had rehearsed this moment countless times during the journey home, but standing before the tribunal, the words seemed inadequate. How could he explain that humanity represented something entirely new in galactic warfare? "Honored admirals," he began, "the humans are not what our intelligence reports suggested. They are not primitive colonists. They are something far more dangerous. More dangerous than 70,000 Vorthan warriors?" Admiral Kex Van's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Enlighten us, Commander. They are a species that has weaponized learning itself," Zexthal said. "Every engagement, every tactical exchange, every moment of combat becomes a data point that they analyze and share across their entire force instantaneously. They adapt faster than any species we have ever encountered." Supreme Commander Vextara, a veteran of the Crystal Wars, leaned forward. "Adaptation is common among prey species, Commander. It is not sufficient to explain the magnitude of your defeat. This is different, Supreme Commander. They do not just adapt to survive. They adapt to excel. Within hours of our first engagement, they had developed countermeasures for every weapon system we deployed. They turned our own tactics against us, used our equipment better than we used it ourselves." "Impossible," growled Supreme Commander Carthon. "Primitive organics cannot match hegemony military technology." Zexthal activated his personal display, showing the tactical recordings from Kepler Prime. "They did not match our technology, Supreme Commander. They surpassed it. Using nothing but improvised weapons and captured equipment, they achieved a kill ratio that our finest military academies would consider impossible." The tribunal watched the recordings in silence. Zexthal saw their expressions change as they witnessed human forces systematically dismantling Vorthan positions with precision that bordered on the supernatural. "How many casualties did your forces sustain?" Admiral Kex Van asked quietly. 43,000 dead or missing," Zexthal replied. "Another 15,000 wounded. Of the original 70,000 shock troops, fewer than 12,000 remained combat effective at the time of withdrawal." The numbers hung in the air like a death sentence. In 3 centuries of hegemony expansion, no single engagement had ever resulted in such catastrophic losses to Vorthan forces. "And the human casualties?" Supreme Commander Vextara inquired. "Perhaps 2,000 wounded." The silence that followed was deafening, a nearly 50-to-1 kill ratio achieved by a supposedly primitive species using improvised weapons against the galaxy's premier military force. "There must be some explanation," Admiral Kex Van said finally. "Hidden technology, alien assistance, something." "There is an explanation, Admiral," Zexthal replied. "But it is not one that our military doctrine has prepared us to understand." He activated another display, showing the analysis his intelligence officers had compiled during the retreat. "The humans do not fight like any species we have encountered. They do not rely on superior numbers, advanced technology, or physical advantages. They rely on something far more dangerous, which is, they think differently than we do. Where we see individual battles, they see systems. Where we see tactics, they see mathematics. Where we see warfare, they see science." Supreme Commander Carthon slammed his fist on the table. "Science cannot defeat military might, Commander. You are outmaneuvered by superior forces using deception and luck." "I wish that were true, Supreme Commander," Zexthal said quietly. "But the evidence suggests otherwise." He activated the final display, showing the intelligence gathered about human colonial networks. The humans have 47 colonial settlements in this sector. Each one has been designed as a self-contained military force capable of defeating conventional invasion attempts. They have been preparing for war with the hegemony for decades. 47 settlements, Admiral Kexvan mused, against thousands of hegemony worlds. Hardly a significant threat. That would be true if they intended to fight a conventional war, Admiral, but they do not. They intend to fight an asymmetric campaign designed to turn our own strength against us. Zexthol activated one final recording, the conversation with Colonel Chen, where she had revealed the true scope of human strategy. They do not need to defeat our fleets in open battle, he explained. They need only convince our enemies that humanity can provide them with tactical advantages, and they have already succeeded. The recording showed the arrival of Zephyrian, crystalline, and void-touched vessels at Kepler Prime, ships belonging to 3 of the hegemony's most dangerous enemies, all of them drawn by reports of human tactical innovations. In the 3 weeks since our withdrawal, Zexthol continued, intelligence reports indicate that delegations from 17 different species have visited human colonies. They are not seeking conquest or territorial concessions. They are seeking military alliances. Admiral Kexvan's expression darkened. You are suggesting that this single engagement has shifted the balance of power in this entire sector. I am suggesting that it was designed to do exactly that, Admiral. The humans used our invasion as a demonstration for potential allies. They showed the galaxy that they could provide military advantages to anyone willing to oppose us. Supreme Commander Vextara activated her own display showing current intelligence reports. Our sources confirm unusual diplomatic activity throughout the sector. Species that have never cooperated before are suddenly exchanging ambassadors and trade agreements. All centered around the human colonies, Supreme Commander Carton added grudgingly. They appear to be building some kind of alliance network. An alliance network based on shared tactical innovations, Zexthol confirmed. The humans are offering to share their military techniques with any species willing to guarantee their independence. Admiral Kexvan stood and paced to the large viewing port that showed the stars beyond. What do the humans want from us, Commander? They want us to acknowledge their sovereignty and agree to non-aggression treaties with all human settlements. In exchange for what? They are offering to remain neutral in any conflicts between the hegemony and other galactic powers. They will not share their tactical innovations with our enemies if we agree not to interfere with their expansion.
Their expansion?
Supreme Commander Carton's voice rose. They are demanding the right to spread their influence throughout the sector. They are demanding the right to exist without interference, Supreme Commander. The expansion will happen regardless of our decision. The question is whether it happens with or against our interests. Admiral Kexvan turned back to the tribunal. You believe we should agree to their terms? I believe we should consider the alternatives, Admiral, Zexthol replied carefully. If we reject their proposal, they will likely share their innovations with the Zephyrians, the Crystalline Consortium, and the Void Touched. Our enemies would gain access to tactical capabilities that could tip the balance of power decisively against us. And if we agree, then humanity remains neutral, and we avoid a potentially catastrophic conflict with an enemy that has already demonstrated the ability to defeat our forces using primitive technology. Imagine what they could accomplish with proper military equipment. The tribunal fell silent as the implications sank in. The hegemony had built its power on military superiority and technological advantage, an enemy that could match or exceed their tactical capabilities while forming alliances with their traditional opponents represented an existential threat. There is another consideration, Zexthol added quietly. The human colonies are actively recruiting. Recruiting? They are offering citizenship and advanced training to any individual or group willing to join their settlements. Several of our own client species have already sent representatives to investigate these opportunities. Supreme Commander Vextara's scales rippled with agitation. You are suggesting that they are stealing our subjects? I am suggesting that they are offering alternatives that some find attractive, particularly species that have suffered under hegemony occupation policies. The room fell silent again as the full scope of the human threat became clear. Not only could they defeat hegemony forces in direct combat, but they were actively undermining hegemony control by offering better alternatives to subject species. What is your recommendation, Commander? Admiral Kexvan asked finally. Zexthul had dreaded this question, but he had reached his conclusion during the long journey home. I recommend that we accept their terms, Admiral. A non-aggression treaty that acknowledges human sovereignty in exchange for their neutrality in our conflicts with other powers. You recommend that we negotiate with terrorists and insurgents? Supreme Commander Carthon's voice was filled with outrage. I recommend that we negotiate with a species that has demonstrated the ability to destroy our forces and turn our enemies into allies. Zexthal replied. The humans are not terrorists or insurgents. They are a new kind of enemy, one that fights with ideas as well as weapons. Admiral Kexvan returned to his seat and studied the data displays for several long minutes. If we agree to their terms, what guarantee do we have that they will honor their commitments? None, Admiral, Zexthal admitted. But we have even less guarantee that we can defeat them militarily, and attempting to do so would likely result in a coalition of our enemies armed with human tactical innovations. You paint a grim picture, Commander. I paint an accurate picture, Admiral. The humans represent something new in galactic politics. A species that can punch far above their weight class and convince others to join them. We can either learn to coexist with them or risk a war that could destroy the hegemony. The tribunal exchanged glances, communicating through the subtle body language of ancient predators who had suddenly discovered they were no longer at the top of the food chain. Very well, Admiral Kexvan said finally. The tribunal will consider your recommendation. In the meantime, you will prepare a detailed analysis of human military capabilities for distribution to all fleet commanders. Yes, Admiral. And Commander, Admiral Kexvan's voice carried a note of grim respect. You will also prepare contingency plans for the possibility that humanity continues to expand regardless of any agreements we might reach. Understood, Admiral. As the tribunal dispersed, Zexthal remained in the chamber, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, human colonies were growing stronger, forming alliances and preparing for whatever came next. They had taught the galaxy that humans were not prey to be conquered, but predators to be respected. And for the first time in hegemony history, a species had forced them to choose between negotiation and potential extinction. Zexthal had delivered the message. Now it remained to be seen whether the hegemony would have the wisdom to listen. But deep in his core, in the place where instinct lives stronger than logic, Commander Zexthal knew that the galaxy had changed forever. The humans had shown that intelligence and adaptability could triumph over brute force and superior numbers. They had shown that sometimes the most dangerous predator was the one that could teach others how to hunt. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Kepler Prime, and Commander Zexthal barely recognized the galaxy he had once served. Standing in his private quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Peaceful Endeavor, he studied the star charts that showed the new reality of galactic politics. The hegemony still existed, but its territory had shrunk by nearly 30%. Where once there had been thousands of subjugated worlds, there were now independent systems protected by something called the Terran Defense Network, a sprawling alliance of species united not by conquest but by shared tactical innovations and mutual protection agreements. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Zexthal activated his personal communicator and was surprised to see Colonel Sarachen's familiar face appear on the display. 5 years had aged her slightly, but her blue eyes still held that calculating intelligence that had so unsettled him. "Commander Zexthal," she said with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "I was pleased to hear that you had accepted the position of Hegemony Ambassador to the Terran Cooperative. I look forward to working with you." Ambassador. The irony was not lost on him. The warrior who had suffered the most humiliating defeat in hegemony history was now responsible for maintaining peaceful relations with the species that had defeated him. "Colonel Chen," he replied formally, "I trust your new position is treating you well." She was no longer just a colonial defense commander. Intelligence reports indicated that she now served as Director of Strategic Planning for the Terran Cooperative, responsible for coordinating military cooperation across dozens of species and hundreds of star systems. It has been challenging, she admitted with a slight smile. Managing an alliance of 43 different species requires a certain diplomatic flexibility that military operations do not typically demand. 43 species. When they had first met, humanity had controlled only a handful of colony worlds. Now they were the central hub of a galactic alliance that included former hegemony subjects, traditional enemies, and species that had never before engaged in interstellar politics. "I must admit," Zexthal said carefully, "I am curious about how you managed to build such an extensive alliance so quickly. The same way we defeated your invasion force, Commander, we offered something that no one else could provide." "Which was?" "Hope," she said simply. "Hope that there was an alternative to conquest and submission. Hope that smaller species could coexist with larger ones without being absorbed or destroyed. Hope that cooperation could be more effective than domination." Zexthal studied her expression, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But Colonel Chen appeared to be speaking with complete sincerity. "The hegemony offered stability and protection," he pointed out. "We maintained order across thousands of systems for centuries. You maintained control, Commander. That is not the same thing as order. True stability comes from willing cooperation, not enforced submission. Through his viewing port, Zexthol could see the space station where they would be conducting negotiations. Harmony Station was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by dozens of species working together to create something none of them could have accomplished alone. The design incorporated architectural elements from every member species, creating a structure that was both beautiful and functional. I have read the reports about your cooperative projects, Zexthol said. Joint research initiatives, shared technology development, coordinated defense agreements. It sounds too idealistic to be sustainable. Does it? Colonel Chen activated her own display, showing economic and military statistics for cooperative space. Our member species have seen an average 30% increase in economic productivity, a 50% reduction in internal conflicts, and a 90% success rate in defending against external threats. The numbers were impressive, but Zexthol had learned to be suspicious of human statistics. And what do you require in return for these benefits? Participation, she said simply. We ask each member species to contribute their unique capabilities to the common good. The Zephyrians provide their expertise in energy generation. The Crystalline Consortium shares their knowledge of material science. The Void-Touched offer their insights into space-time manipulation. And the humans? We provide what we have always provided, Commander. Tactical coordination and strategic planning. We help our allies work together more effectively than they could work alone. Zexthol considered this. The human contribution seemed modest compared to the advanced technologies offered by other species, yet somehow humanity had become the central authority in an alliance that included beings far more powerful than themselves. How do you maintain control over species with superior technology and greater military capabilities? Colonel Chen's expression became puzzled. Control, Commander? We do not control anyone. That is the fundamental difference between the cooperative and the hegemony. Then how do you maintain order? How do you resolve disputes between member species? Through consensus and mutual benefit, she explained. When conflicts arise, we analyze the underlying causes and develop solutions that address the needs of all parties involved. It requires more effort than simple domination, but the results are far more stable. And if consensus cannot be reached, then we find alternative approaches. Sometimes that means accepting that certain species are not ready for full integration. Sometimes it means developing creative compromises that no one has considered before. Zexthol shook his head in disbelief. You are describing an impossibility, Colonel. Galactic politics is about power and resources. There are always winners and losers. That is where you are wrong, Commander, she said with that familiar confidence. The universe has enough resources for everyone. The only scarcity is artificial, created by those who believe that one species' gain must come at another's expense. The hegemony has maintained galactic stability for over 1,000 years through strength and discipline. Your cooperative idealism will collapse the moment you face a real crisis. Colonel Chen's expression became serious. We have already faced several real crises, Commander. The Devourer's incursion in the Gamma sector, the plague outbreak on 17 worlds in the Delta region, the collapse of the hyperspace network in the Epsilon cluster. Zexthol knew about those events. The hegemony had monitored them carefully, expecting the human alliance to fracture under pressure. Instead, they had responded with coordinated efficiency that surpassed anything the hegemony had ever achieved. In each case, Colonel Chen continued, our member species worked together to address the crisis, not because they were forced to, but because they understood that their own survival depended on the survival of their allies. And what happens when your interests conflict with those of your allies? When cooperation is no longer beneficial? Then we find new ways to make cooperation beneficial, she said simply. That is what humans do, Commander. We solve problems. The conversation was interrupted by an alert indicating that their shuttle was approaching Harmony Station. Through the viewing ports, Zexthol could see vessels from dozens of different species docked at the massive facility. Military ships, research vessels, trade freighters, all operating together in apparent harmony. Commander, Colonel Chen said as they prepared for docking, I want you to understand something before we begin formal negotiations. Yes, we do not see the hegemony as an enemy. We see you as a potential partner. Zexthol stared at her in amazement. Partner? After everything that has happened between our species? The hegemony has administrative expertise and logistical capabilities that would be valuable to the cooperative. Your species has a talent for organization and resource management. Those are skills we need as our alliance continues to expand. You want the hegemony to join your cooperative? We want the hegemony to evolve, Commander. To recognize that cooperation is more efficient than conquest. To understand that willing allies are more valuable than unwilling subjects. The shuttle docked with Harmony Station, and Zexthal found himself walking through corridors filled with representatives from species he had once considered enemies. They nodded respectfully as he passed, showing no signs of fear or hostility. It was as if the old patterns of galactic politics had simply ceased to exist. Colonel Chen led him to a vast amphitheater where the negotiations would take place. Representatives from 43 different species sat in carefully arranged sections, each group able to see and hear all the others. At the center of the chamber was a circular platform where speakers could address the entire assembly. "This is how we make decisions," Colonel Chen explained. "Everyone has a voice, everyone's concerns are heard, everyone's expertise is valued. How do you prevent chaos? How do you reach any decisions at all with so many different opinions? The same way we defeated your invasion force, Commander, through coordination and shared information. Each representative has access to all the data relevant to any decision. They can see exactly how proposed policies will affect every member species." Zexthal took his place in the section designated for hegemony representatives. Around him, beings that had been enemies for centuries sat side by side, working together toward common goals. It defied everything he thought he knew about galactic politics. The session began with a presentation about proposed trade route expansions. Zexthal watched as representatives from different species shared data, raised concerns, and suggested modifications to the proposal. There were disagreements, but they were handled through discussion and compromise rather than threats and domination. When the final vote was taken, the proposal passed with overwhelming support. But, more importantly, even the species that had voted against it expressed satisfaction with the process and committed to supporting the implementation. "How is this possible?" Zexthal muttered to himself. "Because everyone benefits," said a voice beside him. He turned to see a Zephyrian representative, one of the hegemony's oldest enemies. "When decisions are made for the good of all can support them. But some must benefit more than others. Some must have greater influence." The Zephyrian's expression showed what might have been amusement. Influence is not a